Thanks for joining us at the Business Growth Café, where each week we select from a menu of topics for a focused discussion with an industry expert to provide insights that can impact your business's growth. With your host, Angelo Ponzi.
I am Angelo Ponzi, your host here at the Business Growth Café, and thank you for joining us. At the cafe today, I have Charles Antis, founder and CEO of Antis Roofing and Waterproofing, to discuss his mantra: the more we give, the more we grow, and its impact on his personal growth and the growth of his organization. Charles, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here today. We've had some conversations as we've kind of led up to today, and they've been fantastic conversations, and I think we're going to continue that today to share with our audience. But before we get going, why don't you give us a little bit of background so we can put some context for our listeners.
Well, I'm Charles Antis. I'm 56 years old, and I've owned a business that I started just over 30 years ago. We're celebrating our 30th year keeping families safe and dry, and the business is roofing. And the clients that we're focused on are those that live in HOAs, and we service more HOAs than anybody up and down the Southern California coast.
Okay, so now your vertical is HOA. So what led you to picking that vertical, if you will, as opposed to just other kinds of roofing or new construction or whatever it happens to be?
Well, I think you end up kind of where you land, and roofing was a summer job that fell into place for me, and the person that I learned it from was the greatest salesman I have ever seen in the HOA space, and that's where he sold. And so that was his focused client, so that became the client that I started to interpret and understand and economize.
Okay, all right, so just kind of a natural evolution for you to stay there.
Yeah.
All right, so before we kind of get started in some of the other conversation, a question I always ask my guests is, when you think about your growth of your business, what keeps you up at night?
Well, if you ask any founder, they have 3 a.m. wake-ups, because we think about everything. And over the years, that's been everything imaginable. Because there's a friend of mine that says, I go to bed thinking it's all going to be gone in the morning. And that's what it's like to be a founder sometimes. So while I've worried about everything in the past, if I wake up now, it's always about the people. It always comes in the form of the people, generally my employees, but also those that we serve, those that we partner with, and those nonprofits and for-profit companies, and those in the community. So it's a people question that keeps me up. And now it isn't the pain of, it usually isn't the pain of how I'm going to make payroll, that part of the people quote. Usually it's how can we move internally and externally people from a pain to gain? How can we help them find more fulfillment and at the same time have more positive impact on society? That's what wakes me up today, because that's the things that in our company we're able to spend a lot of time thinking about.
How do you engage your employees in that conversation? I mean, my father was a plumber, and so, I worked on all sorts of housing and new construction and remodeling. So, but how do you engage that person that's, got the hammer in their hand to really engage in your purpose and your focus as an organization?
That's a great question, because when I started discovering that my purpose would help me be trusted more by the client, I, in the beginning, overlooked my employee. I often tell the story, I was like Will Ferrell in Old School when he's running down the street. Come on, honey, everybody's doing it, and he's the only one streaking. And that's how I was with my enthusiasm, because when I said yes to the Habitat roofs to donate them, it created more work for marketing, created more work for production, and sometimes more worry for other departments. And so what it took is us to be able to ask the question, or hear the stories. It was a way how we had to be able to entice our stakeholders, our employees, to be able to share those personal stories with each other and with us, so that we could map out a way that their purpose could be built into the path of what we do.
Do you give them a venue? I mean, do you have company meetings and say, okay, John and Bill and Mary and Susie, it's your turn to get up and talk about how you were fulfilled this month by giving or doing what you were doing? How do you engage them?
There are some things that are very formal, like much like doing a DISC analysis on your people. We've done a very deep dive purpose lab assessment that goes into deeply assessing what fulfills you and your impact on people in the world. Aside from that, there's a lot of more random or simple things that we do. And 1OC is a local nonprofit that exists just to plug nonprofits to for-profit businesses. And they have a thing called, it's something that you can purchase. It's an easy plug-in called a giving card. And a giving card is a 501(c) give-only gift card. So you can only donate it to a nonprofit. So we give out these. And internally what will happen, we'll have a company all hands on deck meeting, and we'll say, hey, Peggy, you get this card because you did great last week, and then next week we want you to come back and tell you who you gave it to and why. Then we bring up John, who got one last week, and he says who he gave it to, and he'll tell a story about maybe a father who had cancer, and that's why he gave it to American Cancer Society. And suddenly John in accounting, and I'm making up these names,
sure.
But John in accounting suddenly has a connection with Aaron in marketing. That's a real name. I had to just throw that in. And where before maybe they had a little, not even knowing it, an adversarial deal and little dyads or walls built up. So when you create that, it created discussion, and then it became safe for people to tell their stories back, and then so it starts to flow different. The trust, the alignment in the company starts to flow. All the little dyads and triads in a negative way that form for people survive, I got your back, you got mine, instead gives way to belief in what the company's doing. And even when it wasn't Habitat, which is one of our big gives, that was your first way of giving, you suddenly get why we give to Habitat. And in the stories that I'll tell today are the stories that all of my people know, that they also tell why we give to Habitat and why we give to Ronald McDonald House.
So it really helps break down the barriers. I mean, there's so many organizations, silos developed, right? The little thiefdoms going on or fightoms going on, and it's always, everybody's worried about themselves or their own department, and really it sounds like,
including the owner, we all form those when it gets bad. Yeah.
But it sounds like this inclusiveness and helping people understand what the mission is and the value and the purpose and the real value and what you see after you give, right? It's not about the old saying, it's not about the giving, it's about, or not about the receiving, it's the giving.
It's not a conscious change, it's a subconscious change. Everyone's happier. Why are we happier? You can't exactly plug it in, but when you walk a walk of trying to do the right thing, and you have data that now we have that this is really going to matter, because retention's the big thing, as you well know, and when our retention's able to stay at a really high level, it really validates why this is important. And that's the thing, that you suddenly wake up one day and, well, I'll be damned, we have a different set of circumstances than those that are in our space.
How has this shaped the culture of your organization, and how long did that kind of take? Let me go back. 1989, you founded your organization, and at some point in time, you kind of really got into corporate social responsibility. And as you started to ingrain that within your organization with your people, that had a cultural shift. How did that happen? How did that evolve? And really the impact that it's had on the organization.
Okay, well I can pick up where I left off. So there I was streaking alone, and then we started having a discussion. One of the tools were the giving cards that helped us really get there. But in the beginning, it was a little more simple than that. We formed an alliance. The alliance started when 11 years ago, when I got a call from Sharon Ellis, who is our CEO of Habitat Orange County, and she asked if we would donate a roof. And we have a past. We've never been able to let a family. We've never been able to let a family have a leaky roof just because they didn't have the money to pay. That's been at first what felt like a plague of ours, and eventually became something honorable. And looking back, had a huge degree of lift in our culture long before I knew it would. However, what was your question again?
Well, just talking about the cultural impact, and how did that evolve?
So, I'm sorry, the next thing that happened, where I was going, was Sharon called, and she asked me to donate a roof, and so we said yes, and then what happened was it became organized. Suddenly this thing that we did, which we did all the time for families, that we never talked about, Habitat talked about it. Habitat said something like this: Antis Roofing, they are donating roofs and transforming lives. That was a bold statement. It scared me. I thought this is going to get criticism by my competitors, and which it did. But that criticism was the best thing that ever could happen, because when somebody says you're doing something good and somebody else says, ha, just the person that hears the ha, from that point on, we'll always notice whether or not that happens. So what happened is we got a lot of attention by this ad in sometimes what felt like a negative way, but it didn't stick. And one of the things I discovered is when you're doing good and you talk about it, so long as you're really living it and trying to do it, criticism will never help. It will never stick. In fact, it will draw attention where you want it to go. And so Habitat talked about it, and then eventually we learned to mimic what they said. I went to Sharon Ellis a few years later, and I said, Sharon, would it be okay if we borrowed that? And if we said that? If we included your logo in our logo? It felt really kind of wrong at the time, but it's what we were doing. We were donating all the roofs on Habitat. We had been for 5 years. And she said, yeah, and we did that. And that really made it bold. And that really made everybody up the ante. If you're on the Antis team and this doesn't feel right with you, maybe you'll leave. And some people left. And I have some amazing people that left. They just go by a different model, and that's okay. But what happened is we attract in those that can help build it further, and that's what's happening. So Antis Roofing attracts top talent. That's not true for every roofing company.
Right.
And that's not a disrespect on any other roofing company.
I saw you watch one of your speeches from about a year ago. I think it was Disrupt HR. And in the speech you talked about that 3 out of every 5 businesses that are in your industry will basically go out of business. But you talked about the fact that you have a 91% retention rate. So can you dig into that? I mean, why are you successful in retaining your customers or your employees versus other organizations? And really in the broad sense of organizations.
I'm going to back up, and I'm going to tell this story because this story is told more than anywhere in the company, and it kind of shows the essence of why that is in a story form.
Okay.
And because we'll remember it more, and it all goes back to when I started that business, and when I was in the HOA space. And I didn't really have any talent at the time of putting on any major roof. I didn't have the experience, but I had become a leak sniffer outer.
Okay.
And that was my
divining
skill.
rod and
it was so important that I have this skill, and I couldn't get any work. I needed work so bad that I would get 2 or 3 calls a week. That's it. And I had to convert them to repairs, because in a repair you could make a pretty decent amount of money. And the way I would get a new client is I'd say, do you have a leak that nobody else could solve? Let me do it for free. And then I'll prove myself, and then I'll be your client. And it was brilliant. I got very few leads to start from, but they were so important. One of my jobs one day was putting weather stripping on the door, which was my home bedroom converted office, so they wouldn't hear my daughter crying when clients called. And not long after I had that up, I got a call from a woman one day. This is 30 years ago, 1989. And she has leaks in every room. And this is like, yeah. So I'm getting excited. And that next day, I start heading toward her house, and this is somewhere around LAX. And as I'm getting closer to this area, I'm noticing the homes are getting smaller, more disheveled, and that's not a good feeling. Until finally, I turn on the street where the home would be, and I look, and I just see like dead grass and 4 walls, and I'm thinking, I hope that's not the house. But I go and knock on the door because, that's my dad's thing. You always do the right thing no matter what. You always show up. So I knock on the door, and 3 things happened that really changed everything. The first thing that happened was this lady answers the door, and I remember her expression, and it was worn and tired. And she opened the door and didn't smile, and before I could say hello to her, I was hit with this whiff, this gust of mildew like I'd never smelled. And that look and that smell gave me this fear, like I need to get out of here, before I could even think why. And as I started to pull away, my finger was pulled. And in contrast to the face on this woman and me, there was a little 6-year-old blonde girl with an ear-to-ear smile who just was like, oh my God, we have a visitor in our house, and she's pulling me in. And of course you go in. And so I get pulled into the home. I'm not saying anything. She takes me through this crowded living room into a tiny hallway, and then first right into this room that she just like just shows off the room, and then points to a unicorn poster on the wall. And that's why I knew it was her room. But at that moment, I looked down on the ground, and I saw something I'll never forget. I saw 4 mattresses with moldy bedding on it. And it just put me in this stuck state. I was totally stuck, because it's a cute story now, but at that moment, with a mortgage payment to make in 2 weeks, not very many calls, I needed to get out of there so I could go make some money. And I sat there doing nothing until the mother walked in again, and her expression hadn't changed. But when I saw it that time, something welled up in me. And I remember it. I get emotional when I tell it, because I'll never forget, all these feelings. But I just looked at her, and maybe it was pride, but I said, I'm going to take care of your roof. And I went up on the roof, and it was shot. They needed a new roof, and that wasn't my thing yet, And I remember I got on the phone, and I called people, because I didn't have any employees yet, and we got 6 volunteers, and I went to Home Depot and got some goop and some rolled material, and we gave them a drippy on the outside but dry on the inside roof, and that family stayed in that house. And that was kind of my doctor on an airplane moment, where if not me, then who? Mm-hmm. And it changed everything without me knowing it. And so that's where it all starts, because that story kept repeating itself quietly and then loudly. And then so what happens is when you so I had an employee that just recently retired, but he worked for me for 28 years, and he worked for me from that time forward. And he did, because we retain our employees because their stories being told. They're proud of the work that we do. Their wives are really proud, and the husbands. We have the guys in the field. All my men up on the roofs are they're men, so their wives are proud. But all of our spouses are proud of the work that we do. And I think sometimes I look at when I hire a person, I'm hiring their family. Sure. And I think it's important that they feel that way. And I think that I've had men leave, because the roofing industry is notorious for fraud and cash. People pay cash and workers' comp payment. Literally for every dollar you pay your employee, you're paying another dollar in comp, or whatever that number is. It's really high. And so at Antis, the wives will encourage their husbands to stay here because we're doing it right. And that really matters when you're trying to lift an industry into a cleaner practice.
Well, and I saw you get emotional, and that's very vulnerable to share that story, and I can feel it, and I can understand the connections, that it's not just about fixing a roof, it's about helping families and making sure that people are safe. A quick side note, when my dad had passed almost 14 years ago now, people started telling me stories about, hey, your dad showed up one day and he was bringing food for my family that I couldn't afford. My dad would bring turkeys and stuff to different homes, but we never knew that. It was just something he always did behind the scenes. And I think that goes back, we were talking in the hallway earlier, listening what our fathers tell us about always doing good and always doing right. Sometimes you don't see it until you experience it, and I've lived by that as well, and it's wonderful to hear what you have done in your organization, and so I'm going to take that a little bit farther now, because we're fixing roofs. Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned it. We're going to go a little deeper on Habitat for Humanity.
Okay.
Because if I remember correctly, since about 2009, you've pretty much done all the roofs in Orange County.
Yes.
So how did that start? And I never look at these kinds of things and say, well, what did I get in return? What you got in return was satisfaction to know that you helped people. Mm-hmm. So how'd you get in that? And you're also on Ronald McDonald House and 10C and Roofing Alliance, and this thing has grown.
That's a good question, because I think that one of the things that I can tell you as just in my life experience, so much of us can do so much more than we think that we can, because we undervalue what other people will think of what we're going to say or do. And what I found is all of these nonprofits, that cause that's near and dear to your heart, you can get involved. They want you, and you can make the terms of your involvement. It doesn't mean you're going to give 20 hours a month. I thought it would. So I learned this from Habitat. When Habitat called, Sharon Ellis asked me to donate that roof, and because of that past of never being able to let a family have a leaky roof just because they didn't know how to pay, it was easy to say yes. Well, then she immediately called when that roof was done and said, hey, we got another roof. And this time it's a military family, and I'm not, Sharon, if you're listening, I'm not mimicking your voice. You don't talk like that. But Sharon's very youthful in her voice. She's a little bit older than me, but she talks like she's a happy, competent 12-year-old girl. And I think and I mean that in a good way. And so I'm like, yeah, I will. And then what happened is we started donating everyone since then, and that was this big transition where we had to learn to use our people. And so what we had to do to make that work was we started eventually doing quarterly builds where we invite our people to show up. In addition to our people, we invite our other stakeholders, all of our stakeholders. Like, I could identify like 7 or 8 pockets of stakeholders, from supply chain to those you partner with in the community, your employees. I'm not going to I put pressure on myself. I won't come up with 7 now. But my point is we really involved them, and then it really took off. And then what happened is you're in this, right? And so this is where, looking back, you don't know you're growing. I would have never put myself in a board position, but all of a sudden, hey, do you want to be on the board? Well, I can't be on the board. Isn't that a conflict of interest? I'm donating a risk. Like, no, are you kidding me? You're showing that'd be absolutely good for both of us. So I started serving on the board, and then that was something I put a ton of time into, and I love that I'm still on the board of Habitat for Humanity Orange County. But then that taught me that I can do so much more. So when Ronald McDonald House came, and they had their families that they're keeping close to their chalk kids that are being healed, they needed to be close. They needed to have a safe, dry home, and it was like, easy. Well, we'll keep your roof dry, and then so it just starts to evolve, and it evolves because I've learned this magic. And I use funny words that are, I use the word magic a lot, but it's something magic about. Okay, I'm going to say it differently. About not saying no. Just don't say no. Go to bed with a maybe. Learn to say maybe instead of no. Say yes and maybe. Get rid of the word no when you get asked for something, and you'll find that something shifts. I don't like to explain why things happen. I'm just telling you it happens. Don't say no, say maybe, and then magic happens in how you can get there.
Okay. So I want to, believe it or not, we're actually coming to a close. This has been really, really interesting. I wish we had another half an hour. But I do want to ask you a question, and I think this is good for everybody, but what is the best business advice you've ever received and or given, if it's different?
I have some amazing thoughts. When John Christmas, who's now deceased from Christmas Electric, told me, let the big clients come and glow, but take care of the little clients. I have Alex Ladd, the CEO of MB Transport, the largest transportation company in the world, who told me that business and dating is exactly the same thing. If you want to figure out how to make a play, imagine it was a girl you wanted to date. And it sounds silly, those things really help. But the best advice I ever had my whole life is absolutely my father, who in many ways said, leave the campground. He didn't say this, but he lived his life this way, and he still lives his life. Dad's very much living his life.
Okay.
Sorry, but it's like, leave the campground clean and you find it. That's how he lived his life. If he borrowed a game and they bent the box, he's going to buy a new game and give it back. And always do the right thing no matter what. It wasn't sexy back then. It wasn't sexy when I started my business, but I can tell you, Angela, I've always, by every person, tried to do the right thing no matter what, and err on the side of generosity in all my dealings with everybody. And I can tell you today, it's the right place to be. It's trending because it's transparent as can be out there, and it's going to get more transparent. Like we were talking out there, you're going to be able to see not only through the company but through the eyes of every employee, and what you do matters forever. So do the right thing.
Okay, fantastic words to live by. For those of you listening, listen hard. Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation. We have come to a close, unfortunately. So why don't you tell the audience how they can get a hold of you, your LinkedIn websites, all that good stuff.
Yes. Well, my email is charles@antisroofing.com. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Please follow me. I love the conversation with everybody who's all in on doing the right thing and doing good in the world. Creating fulfillment and impact together simultaneously is what I'm all about.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you again for those of you joining us at the cafe today. You can find out more about me, read my blogs, view my show videos, or receive future information at theponzigroup.com or connect with me on LinkedIn. And if your business is ready for growth and you need a CMO, but you're not quite ready for a full-time CMO yet, connect with me. I'd love the opportunity to explore the benefits of using a fractional CMO. Subscribe to the show at the Business Growth Café or on any major platforms such as iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and many others around the world. Join me next week for lunch at the Business Growth Café.
That's her.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion at the Business Growth Café with your host, Angelo Ponzi. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website at www.businessgrowthcafe.com. Read Angelo Ponzi's blogs at www.theponzigroup.com.